Welcome everybody to the first day of our Teaching LGBTQ Plus History Institute from June 22nd to June 24th. I'm Rob Darrow, one of the co-planners of this event, along with Eric Adamian and Rick Oculto, and you'll hear from them in just a minute as well. As by way of opening, thank you for all of those of you who put some comments in the check-in document. Also in the chat, we'll put the official agenda. I've been sending out the agenda to the draft agenda, but now we have an official agenda and we'll put that link in the chat for you. I would encourage you to open that document and have it open because we will be referring to documents there throughout the event. And all the resources, you'll see all the resources at the bottom of that document. Everything we're doing as part of this institute is on that one document. So you'll want to follow along on that. If you want to make a copy of it, you can make a copy of it for yourself if you'd like. You go up to the file menu, select make a copy, you make your own copy, then you've got it. And we are recording this session. Just wanted to tell people that. It's great to see your faces and your names. I'd like to start off by honoring our native land. This virtual meeting is originating in Sacramento, California, on the traditional and unceded tribal land of the Nisenan people. I want to pay my respect to the elders, both past and present. And for those of you who've not done a native land acknowledgement like this, there are links on that slide that you are welcome to click on and see more about how to do this. We want you to know this is a safe space for all of you and for all of us. The pink triangle is a symbol that's been reclaimed by the LGBTQ plus community. Most of you high school history teachers in particular know that the pink triangle was a symbol that was on men in the concentration camps during Nazi Germany years. It signified men who were gay and homosexual. And the pink triangle men were the last ones to leave the concentration camps in World War II. A lot of people don't know that part of this story, but the pink triangle now represents a place for safety, for brave space, for our space to be who we are and to also ask or talk about any questions we may have. And with that, it's my honor to introduce two people from the California Department of Education to talk a little bit, to offer their welcome from the CDE as well as the different information that they're doing. And with that, I'll turn it over to who's going first. Charla's going first. So Charla, you're up.
Hi, thank you. Welcome everyone. Yeah, I know Sarah and I are the Smith sisters of the EED, the division in the California Department of Education. And we don't know that we're related, but we could be, right? Last name is Smith, who knows? But really, really quickly, Rob wanted to invite us to come here and to talk about this. I guess I should say the whole name of our division, right? Not just use our acronyms, the Educator Excellence and Equity Division. Rob wanted to invite us here for us to talk really briefly about some resources that you may not know about that the California Department of Education has. So the first link that you'll see on my slide is actually a huge project that Rob worked on with me, and actually Rick Oculto as well. Thank you, Rick. And so we pulled together all things related to LGBTQ youth for educators, for the youth themselves, and for their families. And everything in California that we could find that's queer, it's on that site. But it really is broken up by, for school day, policy, there's information for every single county. And honestly, it's a great, great, great resource. And it comes from former Mayor, Mayor Todd Gloria now, but former Assembly member. And it really is outlining Education Code 218. But this is really important for you to know about, and specifically for this reason. If you are at a school site and you cannot link to this site, that is not okay. That means that the settings on your school's computers are too tight and they're restrictive and they're not allowing you to get to LGBTQ content. So you need to talk to your technology services division folks right away, because that is not acceptable and also not permissible in California law. So check out those resources yourself, but make sure you can get there from your school site computer. Also, I've been in charge of the California Health Framework rollout. And many of you know that comprehensive sexual health education is a component of the California Health Education Framework rollout. And within that is also some legislation around LGBTQ. So this is a great resource, the second one down, about California health education, and you can click on there and click on professional development, and you can actually go through little modules, and it tells you exactly how long it is. Don't worry, it's not like you click the button and you're like, is this going to be all day? No, some are as short as a few minutes, but you can really look at how to do equitable classrooms specifically for LGBTQ youth. I should have mentioned on the top website, when you click on it, the first thing you're going to see is 3 free trainings. One from APA, American Psychological Association, one from the Trevor Foundation, and one from our own Orange County Department of Education about equitable classrooms. So if you want to learn more just about LGBTQ after this, not specific to history, jump in there. California Healthy Youth Act, of course, is comprehensive sexual health education, and LGBTQ content is in there. And then I put in 2 curricular resources because everyone always asks me, what should we teach for comprehensive sexual health? Well, you got a lot to choose from. It is a local control decision, but you do have to meet the law. So you can look at curricula there and see what meets the law, and then you can get it loaned to you for free from the California Healthy Kids Resource Center. And I say all of that as a former middle school history sex ed teacher. I know. See, you thought I was just all about the sex ed, but guess what? I used to teach history and sex ed every day. And there's a lot of overlap, as you know, different things about human sexuality that affected our history and affected history since the dawn of time. And so that's a whole other webinar, but I'd be happy to tell you all about it because it keeps your students engaged when you tell them if nobody has any kind of, bad behavior on Friday, we'll talk about the history of sex in the time frame that we're studying. Now you know my classroom management trick. That's how I kept all my kids in line. Nobody got in trouble on Friday. We were doing sex for 15 minutes of the last bit of the lesson. And with that, Sarah, my Smith sister, I give it to you.
Thank you so much, Charla. And thank you everyone for having me here. I'm so happy to be here and share some history, social science resources from the CDE. I taught high school history, social science, no sex ed. That would have been a fascinating class. But I just got the history, social science. So I'll start with the quarterly history social science newsletter. This comes out, as you would guess from the title, every quarter. Our next edition is coming out in July. And in this newsletter, we include legislative updates, information on the State Seal of Civic Engagement and Ethnic Studies. We have information on free nonprofit professional learning resources, instructional resources, all kinds of good stuff. So if you go to that link, you'll see another link to email so that you can sign up for this amazing newsletter. I know many people are familiar, if not everyone on this call, with the Click Project, but I also want to highlight their awesome webpage. We have a State Seal webpage linked from the Click webpage. And even though the Click project is winding down, the webpage will live on and more resources will be added to it over time. So definitely check that out. Most of my time has been spent on the State Seal of Civic Engagement. In fact, I think I recognize a lot of you from other conversations about that. So I would like to highlight our main State Seal webpage. This is where you can find anything and everything you'd want to get started with local programming on how to bring the State Seal into your site or into your district, into your county. We have frequently asked questions. We have the insignia request form. We've got PowerPoints galore, the criteria, implementation guidance, almost everything you could want. Anything else you might find on the California Educators Together platform. Some of you may or may not be familiar with this. This is a new platform that the CDE has been working on to share resources and collaborate with educators, with administrators, with everyone, families, anyone. So there's lots of new groups being created on this platform. I'll highlight the State Seal group, of course. We have several collections of resources based on implementing local programming, people adding resources as well. There's also a literacy group that some of you may be interested in. So if you're working on the state literacy plan, if you're looking for a literacy toolkit, you can find that as well on the CET platform. And then just a couple more links to highlight. We also manage a resources to support civic engagement webpage, which, as you may have guessed from the title, has resources to support civic engagement and learning. Not just the state seal, but anything that you might want. If you're not implementing the state seal locally, it's not a problem, but you want to start integrating more civic education and civic learning, we've got you covered there. It's broken down into different populations. So you have resources for educators, for families, for students. We've got a pretty robust list of research and reports as well. So definitely check that out. When I'm not working on the state seal, I try to focus on financial literacy. There's a lot of growing interest in financial literacy. So we do have a webpage with free resources for K through 12 financial literacy programs. And this is also broken down with resources for students and families, which we're pretty excited about that. And then the last resource I want to highlight is one I did not create. I can't take credit for it. It's amazing. My colleague Susie Watt, who some of you may know, created this web page for global education. So she's got all kinds of resources on there for you. She also puts out I think her newsletter is monthly. I have to double check that, but I think it's monthly. And you can subscribe to that newsletter as well through the global education webpage. I think that's it. Thank you so much for having me, everyone. And with that, I will turn it back over to Rob.
Great, thank you to the Smith sisters from CDE. Give them a round of applause for all their work and all the awesome resources. We will add those resources to our agenda list. In fact, I think I'll take a minute just to go back to that and share my screen here so that you're aware that you should be on this one document here. So the agenda document should say official 3-day Institute agenda and resources. And that's the document you should all have access and be looking at from this point forward. I want to scroll down to the very bottom part of this document to point out that we have put together all these different resource list starting places. We'll add in the links that Charla and Sarah both gave us. We'll put those in there. As you scroll down, as you hear us talk this morning, there are systemic resources for safe school climate around different areas, and we'll add those in there. So all the links that we all talk about and learn about together, know that we will add them to the bottom of this document. One of us will, and all the links that we're working on are on this agenda for the day for our event. So with that, I'll go back to my slides. Thanks again to our CDE partners. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the One Archives Foundation, and Eric, you're up.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for coming to this wonderful institute that we've been putting together. My name is Eric Adamian. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Director of Education at the One Archives Foundation. So a little bit about the organization. Some of you may already know this because I see some familiar names and faces. So I'm sure I've seen you at some of our webinars that we've put together before. So One Archives Foundation is the independent community partner that supports the One Archives at the USC Libraries, which is the largest repository of LGBTQ materials in the world. We were founded in 1952 as a publisher of One magazine. And in 2010, the One Archives Foundation gifted its collection of LGBTQ historical materials to the USC Libraries. And now we exist as an independent nonprofit that brings visibility and creates programming around all of the historical resources that are kept at the archives. And we're so fortunate to be able to do the education work that we do in partnership with Rob and in partnership with our Family Coalition. So we're very excited for these offerings. We also did a joint series of webinars throughout most of the pandemic, I want to say. We have about 12 different webinars that we did together. So we're in the process of kind of streamlining all of those. And you might have already received some of the videos from those webinars to review and prepare for today. And we are excited to just continue with creating different resources for students and for teachers to make sure that LGBTQ history is implemented properly in schools.
Eric, you want to share a little bit about how you ended up in this work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started at One Archives Foundation in 2016, right after graduating from UCLA. And, you know, when I first started, my job was, it kind of had many different aspects to it. But the more that I got to know our community and got to know the resources that we had at the organization, the education work really seemed to come to prominence as something that we need to really organize around. And of course, prior to that, our family coalition, alongside a lot of different other wonderful organizations, had worked on the implementation of the law. But then there was a great opportunity for us to form collaborations with other organizations to make sure that the resources and the curriculum and the primary sources and everything else is also made available to teachers. So I really kind of pushed for it to focus more on our education content and K through 12 education stuff specifically. And with support from our executive director, Jennifer Gregg, we were able to kind of organize around this. So it's a topic very near and dear to me, because when I was in high school, I had I got zero education about LGBTQ history, and it just led to a place of thinking, oh, maybe LGBTQ heroes don't exist. Maybe, you know, being LGBTQ, being queer is not okay. So it led to some really dark places, which is why I love the work that I do today. And that's what keeps me going, to be honest with you all. So
Great. And on to Rick and the Our Family Coalition.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Rick Oculto. I use he, him, his as my pronouns, and I'm the Director of Education at Our Family Coalition. We're a nonprofit based out of San Francisco on unceded Ramaytush Ohlone land, where we recognize also that Black wealth and prosperity were stolen through redlining practices. Here we serve LGBTQ plus families and children, and we're one of the lead organizations to help pass the Fair Education Act. We're pleased to be joined by One Archives Foundation in serving as the leading organizations in its implementation by ensuring that LGBTQ plus history and social science is taught in our schools. If you haven't heard of Our Family Coalition, don't worry. It's probably because you're not in the Bay Area. But like I said, we run a lot of programs for LGBTQ plus families and for LGBTQ plus children. My main work is to work directly with schools to help with the implementation of curriculum and for social emotional learning. So if you need any assistance with that, there we go. I know Rob is going to ask me to talk about how I got to this work, so I'm going to cut him off. And so it's funny because, you know, when people ask about the history things, I'm like, I don't know, I'm a social worker. I trained to be a social worker. I thought I wanted to be a therapist at first, and that's what I studied. In fact, if you go back to how I performed in history, I wasn't a great history student. And I think part of that is because the history that I was taught was never connected to my life. It never had anything to do with me. And so how did I get to this place now if I had no real connection to history and I wanted to do social work? Well, out of college, my first job was over at the LGBTQ Center in San Jose, California, the Billy DeFrank Center. And I was charged with running the programs for youth. And the way that it had been set up at the time, and this was in early 2000s, right? So like 2001 to like 2004, they were set up as mental health programs. These kids would come in from high school, and some very few came from middle school to talk about how they were lesbian or gay or trans. We didn't have that word really available at the time, but you know, gender expansive at the point. And my realization as somebody who studied psychology and therapy was that none of these kids had any mental health problems. What was going on was that they were responding healthily to an environment that was hostile to them. So my example of that is if you are burned, you would be ill if you didn't yell, right? And these children were yelling, these young people were yelling because every day through the discrimination, through the bullying that they were experiencing at their schools, they were yelling. And so I thought to myself, individual counseling isn't going to help here in the way that I need it to. I really need to look at the systems that are affecting these youth. And so from there, I built out from a micro practice to a meso practice, working with the schools to see how their policies worked, and now to a macro practice where we're changing the policies of the state, hopefully federally, to talk about how we need to include people of different backgrounds, different sexualities, different genders, different national origins, what have you, so that we're all represented in the curriculum. So that's the long roundabout way about how I got to this work. Thanks.
Thanks, Rick. So I'll just kind of round out the three of us and let you all know that we all got connected because of the Fair Education Act and have a strong belief and passion around helping other people learn how to implement the teaching of LGBTQ plus history. And for myself, I tell many people this story that I came out later in life and like around age 50. And so I joke with groups that I lived the first 50 years of my life as a heterosexual, and I'm living the second 50 years of my life as a homosexual. And there are times when I regret not realizing that about myself earlier. And when I did come out, I thought I was the only guy that had that experience. And of course, as you talk to more queer people, you realize there's all different coming out experiences that people have across the rainbow, across the spectrum, whatever way you want to describe that. But because of that, I've become more involved in this work because I've always worked in K-12 education in some aspect. And that's what really brings me to this work today, along with Rick and Eric and Charla and Sarah and many other people across the state that are doing this. We could not be more thrilled to have all of you here with us today. And just to kind of move back to that, we, based on the registrations, we know there's about 5 of you that work more in the K-5 world. There's about 24 of you that work more in the 6 through 8 world. There's about 26 of you that work in the more in the high school world. And then there's a couple of you that fall into another category. There's a couple of administrators and counselors here as well. As we move forward with our institute today, I would encourage you to change your name in Zoom and add in your pronouns. And, oh, I forgot to do that. Oh, I always forget to do that. But I should have started with I'm Rob and I go by he, him pronouns. It's so important on so many levels. But even me, who's been doing this for 5 or 6 years, still forget to do that. And it's okay, right? We all learn from each other and we all get better because of it. So it's going to be important that you know how to change your name in Zoom and put a number or a pronoun or things like that, because we're going to be changing groups several times this morning and this afternoon and throughout the Institute where you're going to have to change to a different number so we put you in the right group. So there is a link there on the agenda as well as on the slide on how you change your Zoom name. And you're going to have to do that pretty soon. So we would encourage you right now to change your name by adding your pronouns to the end of your name. I want to just point out that the LGBTQ plus history work is the intersectionality of equity in lots of different ways between race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, and privilege. And you follow some of these books that lots of people have read, the White Fragility book. D'Angelo says, authentic anti-racism is rarely comfortable. Discomfort is key to my growth and thus desirable. So some of this stuff may be uncomfortable, and that's good because when you have discomfort, you grow from that. And it's true in all learning about anti-racism, as well as transphobia, as well as other phobias that are out there, and as well as the LGBTQ plus culture. If you've read Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, then you've read this part of his book where he says, homophobia cannot be separated from racism they've intersected for ages. We cannot be anti-racist if we are homophobic or transphobic. If you haven't read that book, there's a whole chapter on gender and sexual orientation that is quite illuminating and talks about this intersection of this work. So most of us, many of us in our schools are engaged in this race-based work, but understand the race-based work crosses over into the gender-based work and the identity-based work, and it's all one. So our overall outcomes for today is to increase your content knowledge about LGBTQ plus history, to share strategies about that, to help you to connect with other teachers across the state, and to share ideas among us for teaching LGBTQ plus history. Our overall challenge is that few of us have ever been in classes like this. We know that it doesn't exist in history textbooks, and when it does, it's just barely there. It's not in our teacher credential programs or counseling programs or administrative doctoral programs. It's not in our teacher induction programs. It's not in our college history courses, and there's few workshops on this. Now, I say that, but thankfully, over the last 5 years, we've seen a little bit of change in these different departments and things like that, but there's still nothing written in the, in the state ed code. There's nothing written in the credential organization that grants our credentials. There's nothing about LGBTQ stuff in there, but all of us working together can make that change occur. So this is our opportunity overall, right? Our students are coming out younger and younger. Students embrace gender fluidity, and some of us don't even know what that term means, which is okay, because how would we know that, right? Unless we'd met somebody who calls themselves gender fluid. But then the challenge for all of us is the fact that 2/3 of LGBTQ plus students report being bullied or harassed in the last year on whatever measure you want to look at. So we see that over and over again. And then the other challenge is there's a lot of stuff here to learn, right? You want to learn about your common message about equity in your classroom, in your school, in your district. You want to learn about your own personal and professional proficiency about these topics, policies, practices, how to be proactive, how to respond to that's so gay things, the myths and the fear of the unknown, and then the content knowledge and pedagogy that goes with it. And you can see the pink arrows here. Those are the 2 areas we are focused on for the Institute. We could talk about all of these, but it would take a whole course to cover all of them. But we're going to focus on those areas, and that's our purpose. But again, I will add that any of us who are here do engage in this other work as well. But our focus, this Institute, is about LGBTQ plus curriculum. And on that note, I'm turning it over to Rick.
All right, folks. So what I want us to do now is I want us to think as a student, but as yourself as a student. And so I want you to ask yourself, who are you and what your identity is? As I said earlier in my introduction, right, part of the reason that history never resonated with me is because the parts of me that I felt I needed to see just weren't there. And so I want you to think about who you are, right? What is your background? Where did you grow up? What's your skin color? What's the language that you grew up with? What are the other languages that you speak? What is your socioeconomic background? What is it now different from when you were a child? Think about all the different parts of what make you, you. Because as we are considering that, we have to consider what all of our students might be thinking about when they enter our classroom. What is going to be the forefront of their mind? Now, as you think about your identities, I really want you to also think about and let's specify the space now, in a classroom, as either a student or as a teacher. Which of your identities comes to the forefront? Which one do you feel is the one that is the most exposed at that time? All right, I'm going to give you a couple of seconds just to think about that. Rob, if you can move to the next slide. Right. And so these are the different categories of what you might think of when you think about your own identity. And the reason I asked you to think about what within a classroom setting is the one that comes to the forefront is, psychologically speaking, in a given space, the identity that you most identify with at that moment in time is the one that you have to prove the most. The one where it may not be as obvious, but it's the one that you have to assert is a part of you at that moment in time. Maybe it's because you don't have power because of your gender. Maybe it's because you aren't respected because of your sexual orientation. Maybe it's because within your textbooks, there are no pictures of you or people like you because of your culture, right? Any of those things that feel the most vulnerable at the time becomes what is most prescient for you. And so think about that as you are as you're thinking about how to teach these lessons. And that leads into our next point. So Rob, you can go to the next slide. Where we talk about implicit bias. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this term, but it would be remiss of us if we didn't talk about what this means. And so implicit bias is basically how we think about things and how we react to things based off of our initial learnings of that thing. And so they're the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions. They cause us to have these feelings around things. And so an example that I have is my mother was terrified of dogs. She knew that dogs were there were many different kinds of dogs. She knew that not every dog was violent towards her, but because of an experience that she had as a child, she was walking to school, and every day as she walked to school, she would be chased by these dogs. And from that point on, every single dog was interpreted as dangerous to her. Right. Now, this is just an example, right, of a bias that was built from an experience for an animal. Now, imagine the different experiences that we have, either as a direct experience or through what we hear and through what we hear our peers and the adults in our life talk about different people, whether that be about religion or skin color or accent, or socioeconomics, or any of the things that we listed earlier. Think about how that might affect how we approach different subjects, how we talk about those subjects within the classroom. And a note about this is that these things develop over time. It's not like something that is instant. It's something that we absorb. And because it comes over time, we can fall into the trap of thinking that those interpretations are true, right? Rob, if you can go to the next slide, please. And so it's something that operates on a subconscious level. It's not like I'm thinking of myself, oh, this person is that, therefore they're this, like on a conscious level. Sometimes it can be very, very unconscious, most times, in fact. And that's going to affect, again, not just the way that we think about something, but therefore how we act around something, how we talk about something. And it operates on different levels. So I've been talking about it on the individual level, but imagine if we have a bunch of different people who've had a message about a group of people proliferated for them throughout a long period of time. Then there's a belief about people who have that identity or that particular trait. And then there's a behavior, and then there's decisions that have to be made about how to treat people who have that trait or behavior, right? And this is how it becomes institutional. And so we don't realize a lot of times that we have that implicit bias because it is often confirmed by our surroundings, what other people say about that. And so as we're teaching these things, we want you to be aware of the fact that everybody has some sort of implicit bias about something. Learn your triggers. Learn about how you feel about certain types of people, certain groups, certain traits, and how you're reacting, either consciously or subconsciously about that. A tool that I've just shared within the chat right now is the Harvard Implicit Bias Online Survey. You can see how you're reacting to things around skin color, things around sexual orientation, around gender. It's a great way to see how you are subconsciously reacting. All right. Okay, there's lots more to say about that, but there's a lot of slides to get through. So, guiding inquiry. Knowing that we have implicit bias, I want us to ask the question, in American history curriculum, which groups are included and which groups are excluded? We can have a simple thing like the Civil War, right? A lot of times we think about that in terms of the soldiers that fought from the North or the South. Who is then missing from the narrative? Well, traditionally, up until recently, we really haven't talked about the enslaved people that were affected by the war, right? Or why that war happened in context to those enslaved people. And so the question of who's included or excluded, Also, traditionally, when we talk about these subject matters, there had to be in history education, right? There was a shift to talk about women's history. There were women that existed during the time of the Civil War. What were their contributions? What were they doing at the time? And so always ask yourself, in the conversation that you're having about this piece of history, who's included, who's excluded? All right, Rob, if you can go to the next slide. And then next you ask, right, does it matter if a person in history was a man or a woman? Does it matter if that person in history was white, African-American, Latinx, or Asian? Does it matter if a person in history was gay or lesbian, bisexual, or transgender? Our answer is yes, it does matter. The positionality of that person at that period of time is going to talk about a lot of the access that that person had, their ability to be able to do certain things, their motivations for doing different things. A good example of this is Harriet Tubman, right? An abolitionist hero. If she was not a woman, if she was not Black, would she still be Harriet Tubman? I would venture to say absolutely not. It mattered that she had those identities as part of her. And so as we're talking about history, the motivations, if we really want to get into the inquiry process as to why people did things and why certain events happened, we have to be able to articulate who these people were. Rob? Oh, you already went to the next slide. Okay. And so you ask yourselves, within these different situations, are different people treated differently? Right? Is a person who is part of the majority going to be treated differently in the bank and in public as somebody who is considered a pariah, somebody who has a trait who at that moment of time is not acceptable? Okay, Rob, next slide. And so this also falls into what I was alluding to earlier, how we think about gender. I don't think any of us here were taught explicitly when we were young that gender was anything but a binary. And for those of you that are new with the term gender binary, that just basically means that there's a binary understanding that when we're talking about gender, there is on one side of the spectrum, man, masculine, male, and on the other side of the spectrum, there is women, feminine, and female. And that there is nothing in between and there's no crossover or anything. And so as we think about this, and this comes up in second grade when we talk about family structures, or in fourth grade when we talk about Native American traditions, it comes up a lot because especially when we talk about things like Native traditions, we talk about gender roles in indigenous cultures here in the United States. And often that's only talked about in terms of men and women roles, completely ignoring that 130 different tribes and peoples here in the continental United States had two-spirit traditions, or if you're not familiar with that term, traditions that recognize gender identities, gender expressions outside of just man and woman. And so you're seeing that if we're stuck in this gender binary understanding, not only are we erasing folks that are currently in modern day identifying outside of that binary, but we're also being racist and exclusionary of other cultures and other practices that had different understandings of gender. And so it's something to think about, right? See if that is one of your triggers around how you talk about gender within history and social science. Rob, next slide. And so what we want to also think about is what is normal? What has been expected for what is being taught at each of these different grade levels? And so you can see here in the list, from 2nd grade to 11th grade, there are particular things that we know that we're supposed to talk about in each of the different grade levels. We know that there's going to be a family unit in 2nd grade, right? We know that there's going to be a heroes unit in 3rd grade. We know that 6th and 7th grade, we're going to talk about world history. We know that in 11th grade, we're going to be talking about the period after the Civil War. We're going to be talking about World War I and World War II, right? There's these expected things that are considered normal to talk about. And that's shifted, right? Again, earlier I talked about how we had to create this topic of women's history because we know that that was a part of history that we haven't paid enough attention to. And so Rob, if you could go to the next slide. This is now in the same vanguard of ethnic studies, LGBTQ plus history, and other lenses of people who have traditionally not been included in the conversation of how we discuss and how we teach history and social science. And so these are things that we hope are going to be emerging towards normal. As somebody once pointed out, if you ever wanted to learn about African American history, you had to take a course that was called African American history, which does a couple of things. One, it does a great job of highlighting, right, the specifics around African American history within the United States. But by separating it, it kind of gives this subconscious message of it's not actually American history. It's this subset. It's this other thing. And so the hope is that this just becomes a practice to talk about all of the different groups that were present in history. It's not a subset, it is history. All right, Rob, next. Okay, so we have a couple of laws here. This is definitely not comprehensive of all the different laws, but we wanted to make you aware of some of them. And so in 2000, if you're not aware of the Student Safety and Violence Prevention Act, also known as AB 537, this is basically the law in California that says that if you are a teacher or employee of the school or somebody who attends the school or a family that has a child at a school, that you can talk about LGBTQ issues. It is not taboo, it is not wrong. It is something that you can talk about without repercussion. We're going to skip a decade, about a decade, to what brings us here for the most part today, which is the Fair Education Act, which says that as you're adopting materials for history and social science within your schools, that they must have representations of LGBTQ people and events. We then go into 2013 with the School Success and Opportunity Act, making sure that we protect our trans students, that they have access to the facilities with the gender with which they identify. And then 2015, Charla mentioned this earlier with the California Healthy Youth Act, kind of the analog in health curriculum to the Fair Education Act, saying that there must be representations of LGBTQ people in situations when you're talking about health and puberty and sexual orientation, right? All of those things are going to be included in there. There are a lot of other acts in here. 2016, there was oh wow, I'm losing the word, but there was a couple acts that talked about suicide prevention policies. Some of those were new, some of them were just reiterating things like AB 9, Seth's Law, where we make sure that there is a way for people to talk about their bullying experience to avoid, to hopefully avoid things like self-harm and suicide. And then in 2018, the Gender Recognition Act, which adds non-binary designation along with male and female on birth certificates and driver's licenses. There's also AB 493, which is one of the more recent ones, that says that the schools should be investing in getting training around LGBTQ issues. So for those of us, for those of you that are here now, congratulations, you are participating in that particular law right now.
And just to add one more comment on this slide is to let people know that our state is the only state that has all of these laws in place. Right. And as public educators, we are bound by these laws. Now, I know there's some non-public educators who are part of this, but this is our state, right? And this is what we believe. And everything we do in education is passed as a law. And all these laws have been passed, and many others, as Rick mentioned. So I just want to make sure everybody knew that only our state has these, which is a privilege. And it's exciting to be here to share that with you as we move forward with this implementation.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Rob. Yeah. So now we're going to go into a little more detail about the Fair Education Act. This is the part of the Ed Code where the act actually changed what was there. This existed within the California Education Act or the Education Code beforehand. What the law did was it added people with disabilities or persons with disabilities, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender Americans, and made a delineation of Pacific Islanders and Asian Americans, right? And so this wasn't something that was conceived out of nowhere. The Fair Education Act was very prescient in knowing that it's difficult to create something that is new. And so instead, the authors decided, hey, there's already a thing that recognizes the diversity within the state and the need to represent diverse groups within our curriculum. We need to add on to that, because that's how we're going to be able to verify, to validate the things that we need to do around history. Okay, so Rob, next slide. Mini timeline here of the Fair Education Act. If you go to lgbtqhistory.org, you'll see a larger timeline, but this is just a quick one, just so you can see the scope of how long it takes to do something like this. And so 2001, at the time, the Gay Straight Alliance, now the Gender and Sexualities Alliance Network, did a survey that revealed that students really want representation in the curriculum. In 2006, Sheila Kuehl got passed by both houses in California, the first iteration of the law. And that law, unfortunately, was vetoed by the governor at the time. And so the folks that worked on it said, okay, well, we don't want it vetoed by the governor. We'll wait for a governor that is more amenable to our needs. And so in 2011 or 2010, I guess, Mark Leno was one of the authors of the Fair Education Act and pushed it forward, got it passed, and it was signed into law in 2011, which brings us to today. 2016 is when the state adopted its new framework. I'm not going to go into how frustrating that was because of the timeline it was supposed to be on versus the timeline that it actually is on. I'm sure you as educators share that frustration. And then in 2017, the state board finally approves the textbooks. And now 2018 was supposed to be the first year where schools and school districts were supposed to be able to adopt these books. We were hopeful in that a majority of schools and school districts would adopt and be able to infuse this curriculum. But here we are in 2021, 3 years later, and this is the first one statewide, CDE training on this stuff. And so you can see how slowly this progress happens and why it is incredibly important that you are here today. Rob, if you could go to the next slide. And so if you're wondering what the framework said about what needs to be taught in each grade level, first of all, it should be understood that the law as it was written pertains to American history, US history. And so that's going to be 2nd, 4th, 5th, 8th, 11th, and 12th grade civics. The CDE itself, and if Charlotte and Sarah are still here, they can confirm for me, has said that even as this was written for US history, it is the floor, not the ceiling, of where we want to be teaching LGBTQ representation in history and social science. And you can see here that there's a lot of different ways that you can include it within your curriculum. You can talk a variety of families in 2nd grade, gender during the California Gold Rush, the Westward Movement, constitutions, enslaved life and families, World War II and enlistment, the LGBT rights movement, and then laws and court cases. Of course, I skipped a bunch, but you have that in front of you and we will get you the slides, I promise. The next part is what it says in the framework in chapter 20 about access and equity. And so we know that a lot of the language used around LGBTQ issues has double-edged. And the reason it's double-edged is because the way, again, that LGBTQ people and words have been viewed throughout history has not always been positive. And so on page 532, it says that both teachers and students should understand the terminology used to refer to individuals who are LGBT and be able to understand the negative effects of slang terms or discriminatory language. And so in some classrooms, using the word queer is going to be fine because there's an understanding of the reclamation that has happened for that word and what that means for LGBT people that identify with that word. In some places, in some spaces, that's still going to be derogatory because of how it is used as a slur on the playground, right? And so it is important for you to understand where your community is with the understanding and language, so you can create a respectful dialogue within your classroom. Californian students who are not themselves in this population may have parents or guardians who are LGBT. All students and their families need to feel safe, respected, and welcomed in school. And so that goes back to AB 537 again, right? Where it is fine to talk about LGBT issues. It's not about having an LGBT person within your classroom. It's about recognizing that LGBT people are part of the state, are part of our communities, are part of our families, and we should be talking about them like any other part of our state, family, and communities. All right. Oh, I guess we got to the what I was saying earlier, which is the CDE. This is, and the reason that we keep quoting this is because this came directly from, I believe it was Tom Adams at the time, from the Department of Education, that said that the framework is the floor, not the ceiling. And so we must be thinking about these things as where we start, not where we end. Some universal themes that are in the framework is that we want to think about how gender is treated in each of these different time periods, how family structure is talked about, right? Are we only talking about men and women marrying each other? Are we talking about same-sex marriages and unions and partnerships? What perspective is being shown? Right, the lenses that we talked about earlier, who is being included, who's being excluded, really to dive deep into that inquiry process of who it is we're talking about and why those decisions were made at the time. And that goes right into that last one, what people or perspectives are not being shown, who might we be forgetting in this conversation. And so as we go through that, we want to make sure that we're not missing any parts of history so that we do have a full picture. One of the reasons that the CLIC project exists is because we want that inquiry process to be robust. Next slide, Rob. Now, here are a couple of queer terms and some of the dates and when they were used. So you can just see in English, right, in American English and some in British English as well, like these terms around queerness have been around for quite a while. And this is just the English terms. Some terms from other cultures and other languages predate these by centuries, if not millennia. I know I get the question all the time about the bisexual one having two different dates there. That's because in 1892, there was a publication that first used the word to describe what bisexuality was. And then for a while, it was used within the communities that knew about it, and then a little bit forgotten. In 1967, as folks were trying to explain again what their sexuality was, they ran across these texts and said, oh, that makes sense. I'm not gay, I'm not straight, but I am this. I am attracted to more than just one perceived gender, right? So that's what that means. Also, a special recognition for the plus. For those of you who've been in education long enough, you know that we started with gay and lesbian, and then we went gay, lesbian, bisexual, and then we added trans on, and then we added so many more until it was like LGBTQ, IPA, SA, LMNOP, right? Like there are so many letters, which is good. It is good to have a recognition for all the different parts of us. And in order to try to mitigate some of the lengthiness of that, we put the plus to hopefully encompass the folks as well. This is not perfect. We know that, and we're going to, I'm sure, evolve that as we go through. All right, next slide, Rob. These are a couple symbols from the modern era. And when I mean modern era, I really do mean the modern era. So like from the 1950s on. I know that the pink triangles are from the 1930s and 40s. We talked earlier a little bit when Rob was talking about safe space, about how the pink triangle was used for men in the Nazi concentration camps, and the black triangle was for women. Interesting note there, the reason that women got a black triangle is because it didn't actually stand for queer specifically. It stood for antisocial. And the thought process was, well, gay men make sense because being attracted to men, of course you're going to be attracted to men, but there's no way that women would be attracted to other women. They must be attracted to men. And so they're going to get the antisocial triangle because they're trying to break community by breaking the bonds of family. It's not about being attracted to women. It's being robustly not attracted to men. Isn't that strange? Okay, so some of the other symbols here, like the lambda, the the rhinoceros. The purple rhinoceros is a rare one. Not many people know about that. That was used in 1974. It's a cute story because it was chosen. Let me see if I can find the quotation here, because it is a much maligned and misunderstood animal, and it is very protective of its own. So usually peaceful. If you disturb it, it will mess you up. And so that was used in the 1970s for a little bit in Boston. There's other symbols on here. The labrys was for lesbians. There's the transgender symbol with the gender symbols mixed together. For those that were around in the 90s, the freedom rings were a take on the rainbow that you could wear around your neck. And so just a lot of different symbols from the modern era. Rob, next slide. Not just the symbols, but we also have a lot of flags. If you are not familiar with the photo that's in there, that's from a cartoon, Blue's Clues, which is an educational show. It was really fun. In this past year and a half, I think, they put out an episode that just talked about the different flags that are represented there. If you want to learn more about flags, you can go and see the Blue Clues episode. But I'm going to link here a slide deck that we've put together for you with some of the pride flags. There's a disclaimer there saying that there's a lot of different flags, so they're not going to all be there. We will update it as we get more and more and more. So yeah, there is that. There's also a lesson plan connected to that if you are interested. It's interesting because it's one where we connected it with first grade, which is not US, not second, fourth, fifth, eighth, or 11th or 12th. But because you learn about the US flag in first grade, it's one that you can use. All right, Rob, next slide. So this is something else. There has always been an LGBT history. A lot of this has been erased, though, the way that we talk about it. One of our biggest, gaps is Magnus Hirschfeld in Germany, ran the Institute of Sexual Health and did a lot of studies around gender expansiveness, sexual orientation, all of those different things. Like you think of Kinsey, this is the precursor to Kinsey. And unfortunately, during the Nazi regime, there was a huge book burning, and all of that data was lost, right? And so it wasn't until about 1976 when Jonathan Katz created the African American history, the Gay American history book, that there was another publication that could be looked at. And so just to know that it's not like we haven't talked about this in the past. It's just that from different points in history, because of the quote unquote controversial nature of the subject matter, either it has been forgotten, erased, or excluded from what we have learned. Some other authors, Rob, if you go to the next slide, are there's Jonathan Katz's book, The Gay American History, Lesbians and Gays in the USA, right? And then John D'Amelio in 1983 did Sexual Politics, Sexual Communities, The Making of a Homosexual Minority in the United States. It's interesting because I did not get any LGBT history until I sought it out for myself in college. These things were unknown to me. I was introduced by a book by Eric Marcus called Making Gay History. And he now has a podcast where you can listen to the interviews he did with queer folks around that. Okay, I know we're getting short on time, Rob. I'm going as fast as I can. So we have the gender unicorn here. This is a way that you can understand gender. This is actually an activity that you can use with your students to talk about, where they fall along the lines of things. Many of you might have seen a version of this where it is a spectrum. Again, that binary understanding that one side means less of one thing and more of the other thing on the other side. This one recognizes that you can be just as feminine as you are masculine. You can be other than those things. It recognizes that there can be overlaps in our identity. Now, the important thing to know about this particular unicorn is that the three things at the top, the gender identity, gender expression, and sex assigned at birth, are all things that form what we consider gender, right? All of those things inform us about what we think of as gender. The two things at the bottom, physical attraction and emotional attraction, those are things that are informed by gender, right? And so you can talk about, you know, who you're attracted to emotionally or physically, and that is something that is affected by who you find attractive, right? Not your gender itself, but what you find attractive in other people. And so I just want to make that delineation to make sure that we're not conflating the two. I think that it was created this way because there were those questions around that, and I can go deeper into that later, but we have more stuff to talk about.
Yeah,
So next slide, Rob.
well, before we leave
Oh.
this slide, I just want to say that this slide alone takes some thinking if you haven't thought about it before. But we want to bring it forward to say to all of you that this is one of those things that all educators should learn about. And you can't learn about it in a 5-minute presentation like
No.
this, but we put it out here as something to learn about as you continue your own journey and of learning as you move forward.
That's true. Thank you for that, Rob. Yeah, for when we talk about gender like this, I usually do a 90-minute to 3-hour presentation at minimum. So you got a really condensed version. The next thing is to think about inclusive language and pronouns, right? This is pulled from a handout, I believe. I don't remember who created it, but talking about how we have envisioned talking about LGBTQ issues, or how we've learned to talk about LGBTQ issues. I have still heard people use the terms transgendered. I've still heard the people use things like real gender or sexual preference, or saying things like you guys to refer to a group of people. And admittedly, things like you guys, tough to break, right? It took me a very long time, and sometimes I still do it. So just be aware of the fact that the way that we present this information, the way that we use language to shape how we think about these things is going to be noticed by the young people who might be affected by this particular framing of the subject, right? So just a little bit about that, and just being conscious of how you talk about things. That bottom part, you know, when in doubt, ask the person for their personal pronouns or identity. I think that is the most important part of this. We're going to make mistakes, right? We did not make Rob make a mistake earlier. That actually was an organic part of this, but it happens, right? We're going to make mistakes around this. And I think, one, we have to be forgiving of ourselves, and two, we have to do the work so that we will be better around it. And so if there's any doubt at any point, always go to the source. Ask the student, how do I refer to you? How do I refer to your family? Where is it okay to do this, right? Because at the end of the day, we want them to learn. And in order for them to learn, we have to create an environment where that is possible. All right, Rob, next slide. And last thing, we get questions a lot about, can you opt out of this history? And the simple answer is no. Right? Just like teaching any other topic in history, whether it's civil rights, Latino rights, one, few students are going to challenge what you teach, and two, we don't ask parents if they want to opt out of Civil War or other bloody history topics, right? If they say that their child is not mature enough or whatever, well, it's like you were talking about equivalently quote unquote controversial things in other parts of history. So why is this standard suddenly here for LGBT issues? And then if we are talking about opt-out, some people might say, well, it's in the law, and they're not completely wrong. It is there, but it is only for sexual health, and it is only for particular things around sexual health. I could go into all the details of that, but just know that when it comes to history, if you're asking to opt out of learning about people, you are asking to opt out of learning about people with different identities. And if you allow for sexual orientation, then where's it going to stop? Are you going to say, well, because my family doesn't believe in this religion, or if my family doesn't believe that this race, right, is good, are you going to allow for that? If the answer is no, then deeply question yourselves why it's even a question for LGBT issues. All right. And I think I'm going to pass it back to Rob.
Thanks, Rick, for covering all that content. I think before we go into this section, you heard Rick talk about identity. So I want everybody here, here's our participatory piece that's going to lead into into our first activity. And what I want you to all do right now is when Rick asked you about your identity and you saw that list of identity, right now at this moment, think about the one word that describes your identity. Everybody think about that for a minute. And then I want everybody to type that word in the chat. Don't hit enter yet. Just type the word of your identity right now into the chat, and then I'll say go, and we'll all hit enter at the same time, and we'll see what identity everybody's identifying as right now. All right, you ready? Okay, go. Yeah, so boy, it's really fun when there's lots of people here. I see people identifying as their gender, people identifying as their culture, people identifying as their sexual orientation or gender and that sort of thing. So I think we're going to take our break now, and when we come back together, we're going to talk more about our resistant voices. And in fact, as I'm saying that, I want to make sure I'm going to pop. So this section, we're going to talk about systemic approaches to supporting LGBTQ plus students and families. There are really 4 different approaches. There are probably many others, but from the work we've done, we believe there's a climate approach, a data approach, a professional learning approach, and curriculum approach. And of course, in the ideal world, you're dealing with all of these, but it's hard to jump in and do all of these at the same time. So I'm just going to share some ideas and things to think about in these different areas. So regarding the climate approach, you might think about what's on your website. And you can see the Santa Cruz County Office of Education website is here. Having some recognition of LGBTQ plus families on your website helps to improve the overall school climate. Think about what signature line you might use as you put forth your email, as you go back into school where you're emailing parents. Think about that, and or your Zoom name, which we asked you to do earlier, including your pronouns, sends an important signal to the community and increases your school climate. Some school districts have put together different posters that they put in their classrooms or in their businesses. These are 2 different examples of the Santa Cruz City Schools and the Pajaro Valley Unified School District. And of course, I share these because I live in this county and interact with these different groups. The group on the right, the Pajaro Valley Unified School District, created badges for every student and every staff member during the pandemic so that when they came back, they had a new way to take attendance and do that sort of thing. Santa Cruz City Schools, they're trying to get this, we call it the safe space bumper sticker, in every business in the Santa Cruz City Schools area. So when you're thinking about climate for yourself, I call it the 5 Ps. Think about the policies that you have impact on. Know that you have control over your place and your space, putting up a rainbow flag or a symbol in your office or Zoom background or whatever world you work in. Remember that you have the power of presence. So you simply going to your Rainbow Club or LGBTQ club and sitting down and listening to students is a powerful thing that you can do at your school. You can participate and be involved in conversations. You can bring up questions like you just talked about. And remember, you can promote inclusive and equitable schools every day because your words and your actions have a strong impact and matter. So from the data perspective, these are pretty much listed on the agenda, but there are different ways that you can look at data. One way is to know that the California Healthy Kids Survey is given to 5th, 8th, and 11th graders. And in that survey, it asks people about their gender identity and sexual orientation. And because of that, it can be disaggregated by those groups. If in your school at the elementary level, you do social emotional surveys, or any level for that matter, if that questionnaire or survey does not ask about a student's gender identity and sexual orientation, that group of students is then invisible because you can't pull out that group to see the differences. And these are some examples from Ventura County. We know that these are the numbers of people based on that survey. And then you get results like this, where you can see on this one question, have you seriously considered suicide in the past year? You can see the gap between LGBT and non-LGBT students in the county and in the state, and then you can decide what to do with that data. The 4th area is professional learning. Think about how you can have ongoing conversations in different places. Again, those different options are on the agenda. I want to put forth and say to all of you that on this slide is what every school employee should know. And if the stuff we're presenting today is new to all of you, then you know it's going to be new to your colleagues as well. I would encourage you to go back to your school administrator and say, we all need to know this stuff. Let's figure out how we can do it. And all of you who are part of this institute, you can take these slides and train your respective groups of colleagues and schools and school districts. This is what I would consider the next level, that you've got stuff going on your website, in your school library, that there are ongoing lessons across the curriculum in every class related to LGBTQ culture, because that's what the framework calls out. The other tip for professional learning is to listen to your students. At any time, bring together a group of students and ask your LGBTQ students what they think. And you will get powerful answers. And that alone has a huge impact on any group of adults. The fourth area is really curriculum, and that's our focus at the Institute. Some of you have received our curriculum guides, some are in the mail. You've got a list of lesson resources that you'll get a chance to look at here this afternoon. And so then we ask ourselves, why teach LGBTQ plus history? Well, the bottom line is you have more engaged learners. When you start teaching these lessons and students actually do share things back with you, you end up with more inclusive schools and classrooms. Every person has a history or her story to share. Remember that LGBTQ plus history is American history. And finally, it's the law. So whatever part of that helps you. Keep in mind, we know this as educators, there's a difference between teaching LGBTQ history, advocating a lifestyle, and promoting religion. As history teachers, especially at the 6th, 7th, and 10th grades, you've always taught about religion. You're not promoting that religion. You're simply teaching a history. And as somebody said earlier, the facts. In a few minutes, we're gonna put you back in groups and have you talk about ways that you want to implement this in your respective schools and our grade levels. So it's important to know that when you implement something, there's some basic things that you want to know to build that confidence for yourself. So as part of the things you should know about is to understand the laws and policies, understand the Fair Ed Act, understand the framework, identify your common message. For administrators, they should plan time for teachers to talk about these topics, because the implementation of LGBTQ plus history is not something, again, that you can just do overnight. You got to think about it, and you want to be confident when you move it forward. But it's something that should be talked about in an ongoing way in your department meetings, in your PLCs, in your faculty meetings, and places like that. And then teach with confidence and purpose. I put this next slide together as the things not to do, just to say these things out loud. You know, as a school administrator, the last thing you want to say is, we have this new law, so we're going to teach about LGBTQ plus history because we've got this new law. That you don't want to say that. You don't want to say to students, this might be an uncomfortable topic for you, but today I'm going to teach you about LGBTQ plus history. Because think about the message that sends to your students, right? And you as a teacher don't want to say, this is new content for me, so let me know what you think about it. Or we have this new policy, or there are some LGBTQ plus students in our school, so that's why we're teaching this lesson. Those are things not to do. The things to do are the things you're going to all be talking about in a few minutes. So for this next, I'm going to give you about 15 minutes. Again, I'm going to put you in the groups that you've identified with the numbers in your names. So if you don't have a number, I'll just put you in a group. What I want you to do in your groups is to pick one slide from the slide implementation slide deck here. Each group will do one slide. And on that slide, you're going to write down 3 to 5 implementation ideas on your slide. And with that, I'm going to stop the recording. So what great conversations you all had, and I love the slides that you all put together. I'm going to share those. In the interest of time, I'm just going to comment on them. I know that you could all share lots of those, and hopefully you'll get a chance to share those in your other groups. So just looking at the slides here, this group, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that people brought forward that are important. So this group talked about building a district school cohesion plan. I want to remind all of you that the implementation plan was supposed to be how you implement the teaching of LGBTQ plus history. And some of you addressed that and some of you didn't. The broader plans are okay, but our focus really is on LGBTQ plus history. I would just say if you do a school cohesion plan, that you make sure the curriculum piece is included. One group talked about gauging community stakeholder interest or knowledge. One way to get into this work is starting with a survey. Survey your staff, survey your community. Surveys are a great way to get input to start the conversation. In this group, somebody talked about start with an LGBTQ plus history lesson at the start of the year. Absolutely. That first week, make sure that you address it somehow, not in the way that I said don't do earlier, but in the way of integrating it in to the ongoing lessons that you teach. So that's a great suggestion. Obviously, somebody found the Out and Safe Schools that was originated by the LA LGBTQ Center. Posters like this certainly increase the climate at your school. And this group talked about their implementation plan, and these are all good things to do, but I don't see anything about implementing the teaching of LGBTQ plus history. So I would nudge you back and say, what are you going to do to ensure that that happens at your school? In this group, somebody talked about adding in more primary sources of LGBTQ plus history of people. Know that part of the institute that we will all be doing some of that work together. So that's a great thing to do, right? And as teachers, we know if we can find one or two great primary sources, that helps with the implementation for sure. And then this group talked about, sharing your takeaway with administrators. Absolutely. Please make sure you do that. I'll send out this recording to all of you as soon as we have it put together. Get your administrators to watch it and share that with them. So, and then finally, this group talked about the teaching impact of LGBTQ plus people in history. So identifying the student voices that relates as well. And then this group, several of you added things in after I went through these. So thanks for doing that. Again, the more people you can include in this conversation, the better overall. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to ask Rick to, first of all, I want to thank all of you for sharing all of those ideas. Those slides will always be there for all of us to use. And Rick's going to do our closing, and then we have a final special guest to share with all of you. So Rick, I'll turn it over to you. Rick, you're on mute.
Technical difficulties all the time. And so this is, we want to do a little bit of a Q&A, but just a little bit. If there's anything burning right now for any of the things that we've gone through. But I do want to share a quotation which kind of resonates with what I was talking about earlier with the implicit bias slides. And this is from James Baldwin. If you want to put up the slide, you can, Rob, but I can also just read it. And so James Baldwin was, his quotation is, "When I was going to school, I began to be bugged by the teaching of American history because it seemed that history had been taught without cognizance of my presence." And so, this just highlights again the ways that we are able to talk about ourselves, the way that we're able to participate in society is all dependent upon how we view it, and that is dependent upon how we are taught it. Part of the reason that I had such difficulty even seeing the relevance in history was because I wasn't included there. There were very, very few times. And so as we were thinking about how to represent who's included, who's not included, why this is important. As Rob said earlier, it's not just about the LGBTQ kids. It's all about the other kids who are seeing what we say about LGBTQ people. When we make decisions around our laws, when we make decisions around how we treat one another, it all goes back to that. Is there anything you want to add, Rob or Eric? Okay. And again, if there are any questions that the rest of you have, please feel free to put it in the chat. Rob and Eric will be fielding that, and hopefully we'll be able to have an answer for you. This is our ticket out the door evaluation. Oh boy, why can't I click on this? There we go. Let me get you the link. This is our way to know that one, oh, Rob already put it in there. One, that you were here for the morning. Two, it's a little bit of an evaluation for us to let us know if the information that we shared was good, if there are things that we can improve upon, if there are things that we definitely should never leave out. We want to know so that we can continuously improve this. We've done different iterations of this presentation over the past 2.5 years now. And so we just want to make sure that we capture this, because we know that the needs as we go through evolve. For example, when we were hit with the pandemic, we shifted really early to creating a document and a training on how to do LGBTQ topics in distance learning, right? How to be responsive to your LGBTQ students across the screen. And so we know that these needs are shifting all the time. And so please, please, please fill these out. The other thing is, if you have not yet filled out the sign-in sheet from the morning, this is again how we're going to be able to make sure that we're paying you the stipends if you're eligible for a stipend. Make sure that you fill that in so that we get you the money that you are earning right now. So there you are. For after this, we're going to go on a break, but we have one more thing, and I'm not sure how to frame it, so I'm going to leave that to Rob to frame what the next immediate thing is after this.
Right. So as we continue to interact with people across the state, this is really, I will just say, a preschool through higher ed project overall, because there are people at all different levels examining this. And 5 years ago, when we started this work, we didn't know who was doing this similar work. And fortunately, we connected with Dr. Bree Evans Santiago, who is here and is going to talk a little bit about her research and what she is hoping that we can provide for her. So with that, Bree, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, I'll just jump in really quickly. I know it's almost lunchtime, so I don't want to be the one to hold you back from your break. So good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Bree Evans Santiago. I've been at Bakersfield, CSU Bakersfield I'm going into my 6th year. And before that, my research has primarily focused on LGBTQ issues in education. My dissertation focused on asking the question, does your cultural background influence your decision to be out in school settings? Because I thought, maybe it's based on that. I don't know. I just had that burning question, found out, no, there's a lot more to it than that. And so throughout that time, I just kept going into that rabbit hole. Ooh, and what else? And what else? Oh, and there's this and this. So I'm just continuing my path with research and wanting to help make a difference, just like all of you. And so connecting with Rob, which has been amazing. We have so many great ideas and things that we want to do together, and separate as we're in different parts of California. I wanted to just present our research to you and let you know that it's very similar to what you are doing now, but I wanted to see if you were interested in having me or part of my team be a part of what you're doing. And what I mean by that is, we're at a space now, we're providing some curriculum. Even through this workshop, you're learning what to implement, how to do that, or what have you. And so we want to see what that looks like. So now we're at this phase where I would love to come and watch, Or I would love to have a focus group with you. What are your fears? What have you accomplished? What are you excited about? Is there any student work that you'd be able to share? And so as you're continuing to implement and move forward in that step, or in all of those steps, if you're willing, or if you would like us to be a part of that, we would love to be able to share that, right? So like this would be something where we could say, look, here's data, here's proof that when you implement this, this is what can happen. And this is what's happening throughout California. So that's what I would like to do and offer to you all. And so I do have a link. I think this is the right one. Yes. If you're interested, you could fill that out. It's a form. It's just giving me your email address, the grade level you teach, or what have you. And then from there, I can send you the IRB consent, and we can set up dates to talk and to move forward. Obviously, it would take place next year, like in the fall to spring year 21-22. And I have several people on my team. So it may not be me specifically that connects with you. It might be someone else specific to the grade range, just so you know that. So I'm really excited. Hopefully at least 1 or 2, maybe 5 of you would say, hey, come take a look. I will travel. We will get some money or whatever. If you want me to come into your class, we could always do some virtual focus groups or what have you. So I would love for you to be a part of our research. And then I wanted to give you a gift. So if there were any questions for me at the moment, while I pull up this link for you, please feel free to chat it or ask the questions. I'm more than happy to do that. But I wanted to share this with you. In the spring, my team created curriculum for grade levels, all K through 12. And so that link that I just gave you, you're able to click and get some free stuff in Google folders. So it's just something to add to everything else that you're getting, but it may not specifically be in social studies. So what we're focusing on is just in general, any inclusive curriculum. But I know that you all are focused specifically in social studies, which where it's almost the direct connection or bridge, right? Like within the humanities component. So yeah, so there's some stuff for you, just some ideas or other items that you'd be able to use if interested. So that's it. I just wanted to share that with you. And again, if you had any questions for me, and you may not be, this is any grade level for me. So the link that I gave you, it has all grade levels. So it's, if you click on it and you look at the rainbow, it goes by grade level. So then you would pick the grade level that would fit for you. And then I will put my email in the chat if anyone is interested in questions or anything else. Or if you're ever in Bakersfield and you just want to say hi, I am available. So I appreciate it. And thank you, Rob and Rick. And there was one other person, was it
Eric?
Eric, thank you so much for just giving me the space to even say hello and present this research opportunity. So that's
Thanks,
all.
Bree. That's awesome. It's just great to all be doing this work together. And I appreciate all that you shared there. We'll add Bree's link to our agenda there. The link for you to participate is there. You don't have to fill it out now. But if you decide at any point during the Institute, it's on that agenda. Oh, and the other thing I would say for people who that might be interested in participating in this, you can certainly share that and any other resources with them.
Yes, please share. The more people, in fact, we gave away curriculum after this workshop, and it went from 3 people in Kern County saying that they had curriculum to 40. So to us, that's huge. Whether they use it or not, that's more people. So everyone that's getting this link and utilizes something, there are more people within California that are utilizing LGBTQ plus inclusive curriculum. So thank you for that.
Right on. All right, everybody. So the morning was this broad overview, right? We touched on a lot of different stuff. This afternoon, we're going to focus more on your grade level and the curriculum area. You've got from now until 1 o'clock, which is your lunch break. Thanks everybody for being here. I'm going to stop the recording.